Hey everyone, so I'm chatting with the Distributist, as a philosopher I have talked to before. How are you doing, man? You alright?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Sargon.
That's alright. I suppose the most relevant thing to talk about would be my conversation with Millennial Woes, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think it was sort of an interesting place to start. I know that both you and I had various interactions with the alt-right,
Hmm.
and I think you had some opinions on them regarding their relationship to the progressive left,
Mm.
or the SJWs as you call them. Although that's kind of hard, mouthful to say. I don't know. I think it's interesting. You were saying something along the lines of, I won't make your case for you, but you were saying something along the lines of you thought that the SJWs and the alt-right were sort of natural bedfellows, and maybe you could explain it a little bit more.
Sure, yeah, I'll try and be concise. Basically, if you boil down the social justice warriors and the alt right to the sort of first principles by which they operate, they're very, very similar. And the more extreme the social justice warriors get, the more close to their principles that they end up living, the more it looks like the ideal result of the for the alt right. And there's no reason that the alt right couldn't play accelerationist at this point and
Mhm.
essentially co opt social justice to fulfill their own ends.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting idea because when someone like you or I looks at the alt-right and the social justice warrior phenomenon, the similarities that they bear to each other superficially are just really humorous and really obvious.
Hmm.
But I think that I mean, it's sort of an interesting thing, and the suggestion would work really well as sort of a diversionary tactic, something along the lines of what they already tried with "It's Okay to Be White."
Hmm.
That was this little campaign they did. They post all these posters everywhere around university campuses, like "It's okay to be white."
Hmm.
It's a great culture jamming tactic,
Hmm.
but I think as a larger phenomenon, the resemblance is somewhat superficial.
You think?
I think that I think I said this before in our last conversation together, and that was I think that a lot of people who are in the alt-right, they're they sort of desire something, and their association with the alt-right, these racial nationalist politics, and in particular these far-right symbols from 80 years ago, like the Nazi stuff or the
Hmm.
fascist stuff, it's largely an attempt to create an uninfiltratable group that can't possibly be penetrated by the likes of progressive forces. And what they desire is something that is nothing to do with separation of races necessarily. It has to do with larger feelings about meaning and what man's relationship is to society.
Hmm.
And as such, I think that there's just no way they can't be in conflict with the progressive movement.
Hmm.
The progressive movement wants a fundamentally different approach to man than the alt-right does.
Hmm.
And I think that their opinions on whether races should be together or apart, I mean, for both the left and the right, the left will say the races should be together or apart regardless as it advances their cause, and the right will say that too. And right now, it just happens to be that they sort of co-evolved in this one direction. But
Okay, let me insert something there because I think the only reason they're in conflict isn't it's because they're both competing for the same magisterium. It's not
Mhm.
that they disagree necessarily on what to talk about. And this is why I asked Woes whether he's committed to the alt right as a construct, the current society, the cultural society that's the alt right, or the goals of the alt right. And he defaulted
Mhm.
back to the goals of the alt right. And so, from like a utilitarian point of view, they could definitely achieve their goals using social justice. I think, but
I don't
like
think
you're
their goals
saying
are
though,
actually. I don't think their goals are actual racial separatism, though. I think their goals
really,
are they want a return. Yeah, I think the goals is they want a return to a traditional concept of society, and they see multiracial societies as being detrimental to that. But the preference for multiracialism or uniracialism, I think, is just a tactic to attain a
really.
different concept of man in society.
That's not the impression I get from the alt right.
Hmm.
I mean, where are you drawing this from? Just so I
I
can
am
go and
actually
investigate myself afterwards.
Okay, so I'm actually drawing this from sort of older reactionary ideas where, I mean, before the alt-right really emerged as the dominant force on the dissident right, there were a lot of other movements that were not racially focused.
Hmm.
Some that I've drawn a lot more heavily on, and one of them was reaction or neo-reaction. Yeah. And they talked a lot in this movement, in this idea space, about what sort of constituted the right-wing mind versus the left-wing mind, or the right-wing force in history versus the left-wing force in history. And they sort of came up with a lot of things like, well, the right wants to focus things on conscious agents, realism of ideas, spirit, cooperative structure, organic social systems, and identities that actually exist in a permanent sense. Whereas the left wants to essentially break everything down, focus on nominalism, consider everything socially constructed, and have a society totally focused not on justice, but on welfare. And they saw this as sort of the fundamental force, and they saw racial identity politics as more or less pawns in this larger scheme, this larger playing out between these two opposing forces.
Right, that's really interesting, because that's not the alt-right that I see. It's... I mean, maybe I've got no doubt that there are kind of the sort of... that sounds like the sort of Augustus Invictus types, which I'm sure are a component of the alt-right. But for me, when I'm like, you know, following their media and stuff like that, it's very much more racially focused, and it seems to be basically white separatist. And Woese seems to embody this. He doesn't seem to care about any of the actual nuances. He just cares that white people get their own homeland where they can breed in peace. And so, yeah, I mean, it seems to me that the core of the alt-right is white identitarianism and essentially white separatism. And I was speaking to another chap called Vendetta a while ago. I really like this guy, actually. He's a really nice guy. But he's alt-right, and that's basically what he believed. And he was telling me about how when Hillary Clinton started decrying the alt-right in her speech, there were lots of black people like, well, I guess I'm alt-right then, and that really freaked out the alt-righters. They were like, we can't have black people in our ethno-state. So, I mean, I don't know that it's not what you're saying, but I don't know why they seem to be so obsessed with the ethno-state, if what you're saying is true.
Well, the alt-right are a bunch of... I think the alt-right are a bunch of traditionalists that have become convinced that multiracial societies naturally descend into some kind of authoritarian communism. And that, well, I mean, basically, I think they largely sort of repost off of a lot of research done by people like Putnam, right? I'm not saying that there are not people who genuinely think that race is the end-all, be-all. Frankly, I just find that psychologically hard to process, right? For myself, you know, I see someone like Melania Woese, and I see someone who conceptualizes the world not so dissimilar from me, but at the same time, I can't personally imagine caring so much about a purified phenotype, right? That I essentially set up a society based on that. But I can understand the alt-right much more as a phenomenon if instead I look towards this concept of, okay, well, they're convinced that the society they want can't be achieved when we can have visual differences between different racial and ethnic groups that all have massively different cultures and different achievement levels in a technocratic society. To me, that makes more sense, I suppose.
Right. Okay. So that's interesting, because to me they are traditionalists, but I think...
Well, can I put it to you? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, it just seems to me that comes kind of secondary, and the race issue is far more important. But that, I mean, that's just how it appears to me. I'm happy to concede that I might be wrong on that. But
let's reverse the thing just to get different perspective on this,
sure.
Right? Like, so the progressives, right? I mean, Melania Woese, he pushed back on your idea by saying, oh, they'll never accept this. And I mean, I think it's kind of a cute idea. It's kind of funny. I made some memes on it this morning before I
you'll have to send them through.
Okay, yeah. It's but anyway, I will send them through. Steve Buscemi being Millennial Woes going, hello, fellow SJWs.
Yeah.
But you know, it's obviously going to have some problems if you actually try to implement this, because you know, we're doing the white ethno-state because white privilege is so poisonous to, you poor
Oh yeah,
non-white people of color.
black people deserve an ethno-state, a state of their own without white people. In fact, it would just be better if there were no white people around where the brown people were, because white people are inherently oppressive. And my God, I can find so many citations for that. So
that will fool a lot of the underlings, but the people who are the upper echelons and the leaders will stomp that idea down really quickly.
yeah, they will. But then they're in open conflict with their own supporters.
Oh yeah, but I'm not so sure that really matters, especially for the left.
Oh, I think it does.
The left is a master of contradicting itself.
Yeah, but
this is one of the key differences between right and left. I don't think there's a violence difference between right and left.
No.
But one of the things that you saw between Stalin and Hitler is Hitler had a lot harder time bullshitting his own Nazi Party members than Stalin did. Stalin could say 2 + 2 = 5, and everyone in the Communist Party would agree with him.
Oh yeah, I mean people
But
forget
Hitler couldn't say the Soviet Union is our enemy and not go to war with the Soviet Union.
People forget that the communists are the people who invented political correctness to specifically override the concept of reality. So, I agree with you that the left is far better at self-delusion. But I'm not suggesting that they will not be authoritarian and impose the orthodoxy. But what I'm suggesting is that won't change the arguments, and there are already lots of people of colour who are basically chanting the same white separatist mantra that the alt-right are. So either way, you're creating a huge fault line in their own movement, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, the question is, I think you are pointing out what I've been seeing, which is the progressive coalition is going to crack.
Yeah.
Because once these POC, people of color,
sounds derogatory, doesn't it? It just
doesn't it? It sounds like I'm saying POS. Like,
yeah.
I can't believe people self-identify as that.
yeah, I'm with you, man.
There's even another acronym that it could be substituted in the synonym of POS. But anyway, with these pocket entity groups, start actually gaining self-awareness and developing nationalist ambitions inside the progressive coalition, as you could argue Islamism already is to a certain extent in Europe, and they're already running parties. Then the progressive coalition is going to start cracking in a way that is just irreparable. Now, the question is, what's going to happen? Who's going to assert control when that massive coalition that's really dominated our culture for the last 30 years?
Yes.
What happens when that behemoth goes down? And I have no idea. All I know is it's going to be a huge impact. I'm not so sure that, are the nationalist groups that break off from the progressive superstructure going to be natural allies to the alt-right? I suppose they could be. It also seems like they might be in direct competition as well.
It's amazing how often I find alt-right people supporting Israel.
Yeah,
it doesn't go against any of their principles. In fact, they find it a desirable outcome. The only thing that's not achieved in Israel is that all of the Jews haven't been sent back there yet, which I think is something the alt-right would like to do.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, Israel is implementing Israeli concepts of ethnicity and immigration policy in the West would be 99% of the alt-right's goal, right?
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah, absolutely. It would be completely their dream state. But the thing is, I mean, do you think the general public at large is going to be in any way receptive to any of this, even if the progressive coalition goes down?
Well, I mean, this is the thing, Sargon. I don't know how it's going to go. A lot of the loyalty the general public has to the reigning political order is because the reigning political order can make hay. It can make money. It can pay off entitlements. At the point where this doesn't happen anymore, I'm not so sure exactly where people's loyalties are going to ultimately lie. A lot of the coalitions that we have in both the conservative and progressive, not only use magisterium because that's too general, in their superstructure, most of the people in that coalition are there because they benefit. When that money goes away...
Sorry. Okay, so I agree with you that there is definitely financial incentive for many people, but I don't think we should overlook the moral incentive. And I think that a lot of people in these organizations and in these coalitions are really there for the moral incentive. But the thing is, it's also the moral arguments that sway the public, because most of the public aren't really they're kind of like lazy politically. They don't spend a lot of time focusing on things. And so when a politician gets up, it actually is starting to really infuriate me how little politicians talk about principles and how little pundits talk about principles, because these things come before policy. And so you can almost predict the kind of policies a politician is going to put forward based on the principles that they hold. I mean, it's not rocket science or anything. And the general public are just presented with like this facade of policy without taking into account any of the principles underlying it, which is one of the things I hate about Jeremy Corbyn. That he stands there thumping his chest going, is it right? And it's like, yeah, but Jeremy, you want to steal people's houses. You know, this is where your principles lie. It's so the question is
they're trying to create moral outrage without actually referencing any kind of coherent concept of justice.
Yes, exactly, and that assumes that the general public are almost very neutral on everything, and maybe they are broadly quite neutral, and they never outline a proper argument, which I think is why Jacob Rees-Mogg is actually doing so well in Britain at the moment, because the man just lays out the arguments on a moral level, and that actually sways people's minds. They seem to be the most convincing for the public. And I don't know whether the alt-right is actually capable of creating a moral argument for an ethno-state that would end up removing non-white people from society. I think the average person would find that horrific.
Well, I think their intention is to. Well, I mean, okay, I've talked to the alt-right a lot, and I've given them. I said I've told them that if they wanted, what you're imagining essentially is democracy stays intact, order of the West stays intact, more or less the political order we have right now, with some modifications, stays intact. There's no way the alt-right can sell their ideology to the public. And, for the most part, I agree with you. I have some pet theories I've tried out to Braving Ruin and the likes of how they might sell this in the order you're talking about, where in the United States, right, they could lobby for an expansion of the Indian reservation systems to include whites and African Americans. To essentially say that there's three native populations in the United States. Obviously, the natives who lived here before the settlers, the founding WASP Anglo stock who invented the country, and then also the African Americans who were taken here against their will. And each of these specific ethnic groups has the right to form little ethnostates through a reservation system. And maybe the public would buy that, right? But the larger project of them recreating the sort of, pre-19th century idea of an ethnically dominated state, I don't think that's achievable outside of some massive systematic collapse. And I think they would realize that too.
Yeah, and I another thing as well is I think the alt-right have got to come to, like, the actual hardcore alt-right have got to come to the terms with the fact that they just don't have the numbers to make this happen if in the event of some sort of collapse or chaos.
Oh, in this sort of event, well, this is the thing, in the event of a collapse. Well, okay, I mean, I've talked a little bit about this in my alt-right series, which was way overly shot, but they are correct, though, that if we have a massive collapse, nationalist movements will get a sudden spike in power.
They will.
And from that spike in power, they could make something happen. The difficulty is, though, that at the same time that spike in power is occurring, all their mechanisms for assessing the quality of the society, what's possible, what they can ask for, who they are negotiating with, all that information just goes out the window, and they can't decide what's going on. And it becomes chaotic, which is what people who are accelerationists don't take into account. People don't take into account that chaos, like what medieval and Renaissance people knew as chaos, is just the most repugnant thing to the human mind imaginable. And humans will do anything to get out of a state of chaos, both culturally and societally.
Agreed. I think they will. But I guess what I mean is like, if that chaos were to come, I don't think we're going to see an alt-right order after it, no matter how energetic they are.
Well, yeah, I think, well, I would say there's some probability. I mean, who knows? It's chaos, right? But if I were a betting man, right? If I were a betting man and say, okay, the order's just going to collapse, well, I'd say, okay, the military is going to come in. The military is going to look for some minimally intrusive way of reestablishing order. And they're going to be looking for any ideology that doesn't revolve around them starting another war. And that does, at that point, it does seem like it's pretty difficult to imagine that white ethno-nationalism is going to be that conciliatory, order-restoring ideology that someone like a Colin Powell or a General Petraeus will be looking to install on
Can you even imagine?
North Americans. Yeah.
Just civil war in America. Yeah, one of the generals like, so we're going to set up our white ethno state now. Just yeah, it's not going to happen.
That's going to restore order very quickly.
Just the PR of it would be the worst thing in the world.
Well, presumably they would control the PR, but yeah, I mean, it wouldn't accomplish their goals.
It's chaos.
Right?
That's the thing. No one's really in control, are they? So.
Well, I mean, once chaos ends, then the generals decide what they're going to do, right?
Right. Okay. But frankly, I mean, like, it seems like a pointless discussion, really, because I just don't think the alt-right are ever going to achieve their goals. I don't think, no matter how long they bang on about this. I mean, I think fundamentally their conception of black people is just wrong. They treat all black people by the very worst among them. They judge them all by the very worst among them, and it's just not representative.
Yeah, it's not a. I mean, I don't. I definitely know alt-righters who do that, right? I want to be charitable to them. I know some alt-righters don't do this, right? But yeah,
most of them do.
Most of them. Well, okay. Well, I don't know. I had never talked to alt-righters about African Americans or whatever. I definitely know that this is a huge problem for their group. But I think that the alt-right and libertarian groups, if we keep on going the way we are, they're going to gain power. That's just the fact. Because we're seeing a situation where just the liberal orders that have dominated the West in past decades are having an enormous time consolidating any kind of narrative control. And they can't make or keep promises to anybody who's a real stakeholder. And because of that, people are looking for people to lobby for them. Now, the alt-right never talks about this, but sort of their achievable goal, maybe this isn't even achievable, but much more achievable certainly than an ethno-state, is just having an anti-defamation league for white people.
Yeah, it would. I mean,
the reigning order would never allow this, but it's not so crazy, right? And in the meantime, with all this LARPing about, my ethno-state and the coming chaotic collapse, which might happen, but who knows what's going to happen afterwards, it's not entirely impossible that a few entrepreneurial and cool-headed members of the alt-right could form an organization that could effectively occupy that situation in a society of North America, like North America, either Canada or United States.
Okay, so I think it's eminently possible that there'll be white interest groups like that. I mean, I was trying to explain to us about this professor at Evergreen College. I watched on their YouTube channel. They've got she gives an hour-long presentation where she's just trying to establish an identity for white people, and her rhetoric is almost exactly the same as Richard Spencer's. It's almost exactly the same, but she's an SJW, obviously, and she wants to create the identity and conception of whiteness, and obviously it'll be centering the power and historical dominance of white people, which is also what Millennial Woes and Richard Spencer's and whatnot also want to do. It's just whether you like that or not that determines whether you become an SJW or alt-right. ultimately, I think there is a synthesis between these, and I think it probably will inevitably end up happening because, like exactly as you say, it's sort of like an ADL for white people. You can't just sit there and expect to hit white people with these propaganda engines and them not demand some kind of representation. It's inevitable, So, and I wish the progressives would fucking stop, but they won't. So we need to.
Well, they won't because it's lucrative for them to keep on going on this bandwagon they're on. Because, like I said,
it's not just about lucrative though. It's also about the principles by which they operate. It's the worldview that they have. They can't stop. Now they've set themselves on this path because this is I was trying to explain to people why Venezuela is going to get more progressively socialist, and they're like, yeah, well, only 30% of their economy is owned by the government. It's like, yeah, but that's not going to go down, is it? The principles are your destiny. They're the path you're walking on, and you just may as well just run because you're going to get to the end of this path eventually, or you're going to ruin your movement or whatever it is that you're using to sort of travel along with these principles with. So. We may as well just get them to the end point and then just settle it there, in my opinion.
Well, I'll say this. I think there's something I definitely just strongly urge to your listeners. You probably not to accept this. I think it's fundamentally. It's fundamentally important to understand that the alt-right and the progressives or SJWs, they're not the same thing. They're superficially looking similar right now. And the second thing I think we need to understand is that the political moment that we're in currently is driven by processes that have been going on the left. And as usual, the right is fundamentally acting in a reactionary capacity to this. And the alt-right's very much, you probably agree to some of this, but when we get down to, identity politics and the stuff, I think that the left is just running out of ideas, running out of steam, and has nowhere to go with the multicultural society it's created. It knows it can't continuously pay off its constituents, and so it's going to the most basic human instinct, which is identity politics, which we know in a collapse will be something that will, identity politics and religious identity politics or racial identity politics, those will carry through a collapse environment once institutions can no longer pay back their constituents, right? So the left is going to that well because it has no other well to go to. And because of that, it's sort of sending signals to the right, people who sort of prefer metaphysically stable and ordered perspectives on the world. It's sending a signal to them that it's time to go to that racial identity politics well as well. Because that will be a very, very fruitful place to be if a decline continues to happen. Because that's, if we keep on going on this trajectory, we can no longer consolidate, a reigning ideology. That's just going to become more and more lucrative, and more people will go to it.
I agree. I agree that I think the rise of the alt-right has been a creation of the progressives. I don't think there's any doubt about that. These ideas have always existed, but why are they gaining traction now? And it's like, well, you're seeing openly anti-white, and I'm not bothered about calling them anti-white because they legitimately are anti-white movements and institutional sort of exercise of power that is in that way. And in a way, the progressives have made a rod for their own back because they've been I have to say, they've been playing off the goodwill of people who don't really know any better, using identity politics. And it was a powerful weapon because people care about women and minorities. People don't want to oppress women and minorities. If you can make a good case for the status quo being oppressive to women and minorities, then people are going to listen because they're good people. They don't want to hurt anyone. But like you say, that's it. It's a powerful thing to do, and people are going to copy it, and people are also going to draw from that well. And as you say, they're running out of ideas because that was the only weapon they had, and they used it to great effect. And they have a phenomenal amount of institutional power at this point, and they're going to use it to the maximum effect. They're going to do it ruthlessly.
Can I ask you, why do you think this is happening now? This would have never flown 30 years ago.
Yeah, no, that's true.
On either side.
I can't imagine, going back to the 90s, I can't imagine someone saying white people X.
Yeah, this is sort of the question of our age: is why is this happening now? Because I think maybe by answering that question, we might understand the effect that's going on.
Okay, well, Jordan Peterson seems to think that basically professors in left-wing institutions in America, which are most of them, doing various kinds of social science courses, have radicalized their students to utterly undermine the values of the Enlightenment, which they have, and that there are millions of these, and that these millions operate these. I'll just call them millennials for now, but I realize I'm being inaccurate when I do that. The millennial generation has basically been inculcated into. I mean, you could effectively just call it socialism for race and gender. And so this kind of worldview, the oppressor-oppressed dichotomy that they use, they've translated it to everything, and they've completely undermined the concept of a legitimate hierarchy. And so this entire generation has been primed to hate the amazing civilizations that they live in. And I think that this is just the natural outgrowth of millions of people who don't really know very much about the world because they're young, don't really have any money because they're young, and they find themselves in a world that they find intolerable.
Yeah, I think you really nailed it with the one word. It's the legitimate hierarchy, right? That is, and I want to link it sort of, if I may, with the word you brought up at the beginning of this conversation, and that is magisterium. Because I think that these two are very highly related. All societies at their foundation are based on some notion of legitimate hierarchy.
Yes.
Which is more or less what magisterium means, the authority, right? The authority of certain people or certain leaders to speak and have their ideas, or certain ideas even, to have their concepts enacted or taught or instantiated over others that might be their rivals. And if this magisterium or legitimate hierarchy, whatever you preferred, is dissembled, then you have flowing into its absence really what I consider just a ruinous and chaotic philosophy.
Well,
which is
that's exactly what they're aiming for. Sorry to jump in, but like they want the complete obliteration of any kind of compulsion, any kind of hierarchy, and ultimately, I mean,
any kind of meaning.
Well,
it's even more fun. You said Millennial said like, oh, they don't understand the difference between races, and you one-upped him and said they don't understand the difference between individuals. They don't understand the difference between words.
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, they've spent so much time redefining words to mean whatever the fuck they like.
No, there's a number of words that just don't mean anything. Gender doesn't mean anything. What does gender mean? It doesn't mean an expression, right? Because if you associate gender with an expression, you're being a sexist. It doesn't mean a biology, because if you associate a gender with a biology, you're being transphobic. So at the end of the day, the word just means nothing. It's pure indicator with no actual meaning behind it whatsoever.
It is interesting, isn't it?
And there's numerous words like that in the progressive lexicon. You'll encounter again and again and again. Privilege is another one. It means nothing. Like, once you actually take into consideration all the different ways they've redefined it, they've totally contradicted themselves. It occupies the entire universe of meaning. Well, it's a tautological definition.
This is one of the things I love about Hayek. He just goes around, he went around demanding someone define social justice. Just define it. What does it even mean?
Yeah, well, that's actually really interesting, right? Because I think the conversation between Hayek and Rawls, was it Rawls that he was...
It could be. I've actually been, I'm not going to lie, I've been kind of avoiding Rawls because I know there's a lot of back work that I have to do to really be able to grasp the nuances of what he was saying. So I've actually, he's later on my list, so I haven't got to him yet, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's a critical. There's a lot of intellectual work that needs to be done there, right?
Yeah, I know.
Because I think Hayek did get the better half of that conversation,
right?
But I think though that if you take the pure Hayekian perspective, it does sort of beg an Aristotelian question about what justice is to begin with. Mm-hmm. But that's neither here nor there. I think the fundamental thing though is just what progressivism is essentially a deconstruction of meaning at all levels. And the deconstruction of individual achievement and the deconstruction of group achievement and deconstruction of civilizational hierarchies is just a consequence of their attack on meaning itself at the most basic level.
Yeah, but you know why, though, don't you?
Well, actually, no, we have different ideas.
Okay, well, let me... I'm pretty sure that I know why. Because meaning itself is constraining. It's infringing on their freedom to not mean that thing. Like,
absolutely.
Everything they want is like total and absolute freedom. And you think, well, why wouldn't you want that? It's like, because that's total and absolute chaos. That's
total and absolute freedom plus total and absolute equality equals total and absolute chaos.
Absolutely. It is the scariest, most like, it's such a scary projection of the future that they want. It's like, oh, why can't you just do anything? It's like, because there are physical reasons why we can't do certain things. Human beings are, they are real physical things. They're animals. They have drives. They have motivations. They have natural, instincts and, natural desires. They have, various passions. It's just a crazy idea to think you can have this kind of absolute freedom. Honestly, I find that it's going to be worse than Mad Max.
Yeah. I mean, this is sort of, and this what sort of creates what a lot of reactionaries think is the civilizational cycle, right? That mankind's technology increases, and because the technology increases, it allows for the deconstruction of societal constraints. But the deconstruction of the societal constraints always outpaces the technological growth. Which is what creates this sort of decadent effect. And then eventually the decadent effect overtakes the technological growth. Society can't pay back its constituents, and we go through a civilizational cycle, right? There's a collapse and then a reemergence of something afterwards. And this is sort of the Spenglerian or reactionary or the cyclical view of history. And I think there's something to it.
Well,
or at least it explains sort of this effect. What?
Well, there certainly is. And it's actually not that difficult to pass if you think about it. It's like it requires self-sacrifice to build something. To create anything requires self-sacrifice on your part. But if you didn't build something and you've been gifted a wonderful civilization, say, then you can assume that it didn't require anything to end up at this end point because it wasn't a self-sacrifice on your point. And so at any point you can start deconstructing this, which accurately looks like degeneracy to people outside of this privileged position. The people who are the ones who actually had to go through the sort of Aristotelian steps of, right, if I just have to do this thing to achieve an end goal, the people on the outside, they're going to absolutely look at those people as degenerates because they are literally degenerating back through the steps and sacrifices that it took to get to the point where they had the freedom to do that.
I think you hit the nail on the head. That is exactly what's going on, right? And that's why I think I kind of criticize you when you said this, but you're right to point out as education as being the fundamental mechanism through which this has come, right?
Yeah.
Because classically, education through both indoctrination, through both training and through coming of age and testing, right? Especially for young men. This is very important for young men. That is designed, in a sense, to recreate in the minds of the young man the struggles that were gone through by previous generations in order to get to the point where he is right now.
Yes.
Having the information and the wealth delivered to the young person separated from that struggle essentially allows the person to imagine that this was essentially procured by, drumroll, privilege, right? That this had no prior struggle, that this came basically out of the ether. This is always a problem, too, for progressives. If you ever go up and ask them how they think, given that the previous civilizations were all warlike barbarians that killed each other, they will acknowledge that for the most part, unless they're really delusional. You have to ask them how white privilege was obtained in the first place, given that everyone was killing each other, given that the biggest murderer in history was not Hitler, but Genghis Khan.
Yeah.
Right? So, and they always have a hard time with that because they genuinely don't think that any good thing ever came from struggle. To them, struggle only resulted in bad things.
Yeah. Whereas it's the opposite. It's the absolute
opposite. They don't have
opposite.
this idea that should have been inculcated in them through education, that struggle is necessary in order to obtain some kind of valuable
Yeah.
position or possession of the culture they wield.
Good things have only ever come from struggle. Like, even if it's just personal struggle of you getting your degree and then getting a job, that's how good things come to people who don't have them and don't have, I dare say the word, a privilege of being given them. And it's really infuriating to me to watch these fucking just sons of wealthy people sit there and talk about the privilege of white people who are poor. There's a part of me that just goes ballistic about it.
It is really strange. And I think that, I think that there's a lot of interesting things to explore in reactionary thought. But as sort of, for myself and my own, I really want to start having professors from universities on my channel, because I think the biggest thing to explore right now is the mind of the progressive, right? Mm-hmm. It's kind of weird. Are you a fan of Star Trek or?
Oh yeah, I'm a big fan of Star Trek.
So there's this famous episode where they have the Borg cube and it's about to simulate Earth, but they manage to stop it, right? Mm-hmm. And they're deciding whether they want to blow the cube up and save Earth or take the risk and explore the mind of the Borg while they're in this sleeping state, right? Mm-hmm. And I feel that's a little bit where our civilization is right now. We're kind of on the verge of a disaster. And I feel like we're in a very unique historical place. Very few people were in the place that we are in right now, and we're writing about it. I think the last person who really was St. Augustine.
You think so? I mean,
we're seeing a civilization essentially cannibalize itself, and I'm fascinated about how this process works. Right?
I tell you, it's very hard to. It's very difficult to find other examples of civilizations that have been so opulent that they can afford to cannibalize themselves in the way we are, because I mean, like, you can go back to ancient Athens, and this at the height of Athens' power, and you have Demosthenes complaining about Philip of Macedon, and no one in the assembly cares. No one, and they mock him. They say, "Oh, Demosthenes is just fear mongering," when he's taking territory from Athens, and they're in this wealthy, privileged elite bubble, miles away from the danger, and so they can afford to just ignore it and poo-poo Demosthenes and then carry on. And it must have been incredibly frustrating for him. I was reading through his Philippics and just thinking, wow, this man knows exactly what we're saying. We are the Demosthenes of our time. But the ancient Athens was obviously much smaller and nowhere near as wealthy as we are. And so it was, it didn't, well, I suppose it probably lasted about 20 years, didn't it? But it's not as, I don't think any civilization has had so much to cannibalize, and so it's difficult to find.
If the reactionary Spenglerian view or Mencius Mollbuggian view of the world is right, then the fact that the technological progress has been going up faster means that the civilizational oscillation is going to be much larger, right?
Yes.
Steeper gains, steeper falls, and
yes.
What makes it really deadly, right, is that the frequency of this civilizational wave, it's much, much longer than a human lifespan. So no one can really engineer it because we don't have, our lifespans aren't long enough to really witness it in full upward and downward motion. So one of the things that's really fascinated me is what's going on in the minds of the progressive, because that is really front and center where this break in the educational pattern that we described previously has occurred. And I really, really want to understand that. And I'm thinking it's hard to get progressives into an honest conversation, but I'm thinking of your conversation with someone like Eli Bosnick, right? I mean, I don't know. I listened, that was 4 hours.
I enjoyed every second of that conversation.
I know. I had to listen to it twice. Yeah. I mean, it was mainly you kind of shutting, you could tell that he was, well, I don't know. Maybe you could give me your take on it because you actually participated.
Yeah, okay.
In it, but I listened to it. It was 4 hours, and I listened to it twice while I was.
Let me just explain how I felt about it at the time and directly afterwards. So, I thought he was going to be more normative. I didn't think he would be so. I don't know. Like, I expected him to come with something. But every time I challenged him on anything, he just would be like, I don't know. And at one point I asked him what his highest value was. And he was just like, I don't know. And it's like, holy crap. I can't even imagine not knowing what I value the most. I mean,
he reflects the question of value back onto the questioner, right?
yeah, absolutely. And the whole time, it felt to me, using like a metaphor, if any debate is a battle, a contest, I felt like what I was doing was just, I felt like I was dealing with like an army that didn't have like any particular core. It was just like horsemen or something, and I would just lay down a rank of pikemen at every row, and he'd try and come down another flank, so I'd just lay another one down. And so eventually I had this absolutely impenetrable superstructure of principles laid out that none of them contradicted one another. They all reinforced each other, and he was just on the outside and there was nothing he could do. That's how I felt.
To lay down, it's very similar to what I felt listening to it. I mean, not to go back again to Star Trek, but again, like the Borg, I felt like they have two weapons, right? The little thing that scans the shields for weaknesses, and then the cutting beam, right?
Yeah.
It felt like he was constantly scanning your ideology for some place that he could dig in the deconstructive beam, right? And then cut right through, right?
Yeah.
And you were kind of denying him. You were saying essentially half of a progressive approach to argumentation, right? Yeah. The first half is scan the argument for a deconstructive weakness. The next thing is use the deconstructive weakness to totally undermine their premises and question the ideology, right? Yeah. And that's something that I got the impression of too. I felt it was very hard in that conversation to figure out, and this is what I was listening for when I listened to it twice. It was hard to figure out when Eli Bosnick was being genuine and how much of it was being tactical. Agreed. Or even if there was a difference.
I genuinely feel that he wasn't being as genuine as he could be, especially when I felt that I was just setting up a series of really strong defenses, and I could tell like he was like a prowling wolf almost, or something like that. He was like, okay, I know I'm not getting in that way, so I'm gonna. Well, let me ask you this, and then he goes around to another flank and looks for another weakness. And
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd been reading a lot, and I'm hoping it showed, because I knew exactly what I believed. I knew.
I don't think it was really the reading. I think it was you understanding how the progressive attack goes.
Oh
right?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, but the only reason I could put up such a solid defense is because of the clarity I've found myself with at the end of the work I've been doing, and I could tell that he hadn't done as much work as I had.
Well, I mean, he thought didn't he think that the ethos passive thing, he mistaken Plato for Aristotle at one point.
Yeah, but that's a small thing. I mean, anyone could. I always forget whether it's Innocent or Urban who called the Crusade. And so,
God,
it was Innocent.
I think it's Urban, isn't it?
I'm going to Google it now because I'm certain it's Innocent. Let me.
The thing is, I don't think the Crusades took place in the same papal reign that you're talking about the first crusade.
It was Urban. God. I mean, now I'm annoyed at myself. It was
the Cathars, which was also a crusade, right?
Yeah. But
I guess which crusade, right?
Yeah. But anyway, getting back to Eli Bosnick, I just felt that I had built a fortress that he couldn't assail, and people were like, you should have pressed him harder on certain points. And it's like, yeah, but he'd already conceded when he said he didn't know. I could have carried on pressing that, but he'll just keep going, I don't know. And eventually he may have drawn me out. Sorry?
He wasn't giving you any points to press on.
Well, no, I mean, I could easily have, pressed him on something like, what's your highest principle? I could have stripped him down at that. I could have been like, well, if you, so you're saying you don't stand for anything. I could have sort of hammered him, but he would have just sat there like jelly and just absorbed it, going, I don't know. 'Cause, like you say, he didn't stand for anything. And the thing is, once
you're in a negative position, you can't really be attacked in that way.
Yeah, that was the thing. I didn't want to sort of come out of my defenses and give him an angle of attack. It was my win condition was just stay within my defenses and just watch him do nothing. Because at the end of it, he came off like looking like an unprincipled, slimy, sort of snake oil salesman or something. But I looked like I had a solid set of principles that I could just lay down at will and say, no, this is what's right and this is what's good, and you have nothing. And that's how he came across.
I think Bosnick's voice makes him sound like that. But yeah, no, I think it was very interesting discussion, because I'm just trying to think about how people like that think, right? Because they're the ones who are teaching students in university. They're the ones setting the media agenda. they're holding the reins of power currently,
Mm-hmm.
and the success of any kind of counter-progressive movement is going to rely on tearing these people away from the progressive infrastructure that they dedicated themselves to, right?
Yep.
And I really wonder what that force is going to be.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right that we have to understand the progressive mind, and like this is the alt-right need to learn social justice for their own good. If they want to do anything, they need to learn this. Like in the anti-SJWs, the liberals, and I'm sick of calling ourselves anti-SJWs or skeptics. Let's just take the word liberal, not you personally, but like people listening. If you're a liberal, just call yourself a liberal. Don't call yourself skeptic. Don't call yourself an anti-SJW or an anti-feminist. Call yourself a liberal, and then from that point, you can explain your objections to social justice and to this. Because the problem is we're allowing our enemy to define what we are, and that pisses me off. We've got to stop doing that.
Well, some people aren't liberals, though.
No, I know. I'm talking to the people who would.
Liberal,
I know. I'm not talking about you or the alt-right. I'm talking about like people who are quote unquote skeptics but don't have a solid label for themselves. We should just take liberal. It's ours. Let's have it.
Well, but I mean, the reason why I think that actually is, I would very much get behind that. But liberalism, you are buying up a property that's been seeing steep declines in the last 10 years.
That's true. That's true. And when the property value of it goes back up because of what we do, then we'll have profited immensely, won't we?
If there's a collapse, that label is going to be worth nothing.
To be fair, though, I mean, what labels are really worth anything these days?
The labels that are worth something in a collapse are religious and racial identification. Those stay.
I don't know. I mean, like, it's hard to the label conservative these days is not really very well thought of, and that used to be a really solid,
no, that's meaningless.
Yeah, that used to be quite solid as far as I perceived it anyway. But it's amazing how watching the moral collapse of the conservatives has just been embarrassing, especially in this country. Holy crap! Oh my god. At one point,
they still mean something. I mean, Ben Shapiro.
Oh yeah, Shapiro's doing a great job.
Right?
He's doing a great job of bringing back the moral rectitude to the label of conservative. Like, it is a moral force to Shapiro, and he can make.
I don't think the definition of conservative has declined. I think the power of conservatism has declined.
Oh, absolutely. But it's the moral force behind it. They've forgotten why they're right and good, and it's the same with liberals. Against the progressives, the liberals have no defences against the progressives, and it annoys the hell out of me.
Mm-hmm. Well, why do you think that is, though? I mean, this is something we talked about a little bit in our first conversation.
Lack of education.
And the liberals have been essentially, to borrow an alt-right phrase, liberalism has been cucked by progressivism.
Yeah.
No, that's the story of the last 30 years, ideologically.
Yeah. Oh my god, yeah, exactly. In the last couple of years, I've come to realise the full scale of the amazing cucking that liberalism has taken from progressivism, which is why we need to bring back Chad liberalism.
I guess in some sense Ben Shapiro is a Chad liberal, even though he calls himself a conservative.
Absolutely he is. In many ways he absolutely is. And this is the thing. It's like I watched Braving Ruin did a reply video to me, and I was laughing the whole way through it, because he doesn't realise how much he is cucking for the leftist ethic. And it's amazing to me.
Maybe.
Oh, totally.
I mean, certainly he's not liberal, though, right? I mean,
no, I know.
Ruin.
I know. That's the funny thing about it. He completely cucks to what they think is good, and it's like, why are you doing that? He's like, I don't want to deplatform him. And it's like, bitch, you want to deplatform loads of people. Otherwise, you're saying, I'm okay with the Jewish media being the Jewish media and controlling Western society. You need to deplatform these people. Don't sit there and tell me that you don't want to deplatform people. Come on, But hold to your own principles. Don't endorse their principles, because otherwise you're never going to win. This is the problem that liberals had the first time someone turned around and said, you know what we need? Affirmative action for women and black people. No, we don't. No, we don't.
Yeah, but sort of there's sort of an implicit, very philosophical issue at the heart of this objection that it's really difficult to get to, and that is once when we have sort of a properly constructed magisterium, be that Catholic or liberal or communist or whatnot.
Yeah, when the Catholic
then we can talk
state
about
arrives.
the appropriate places where everyone deserves a platform, right? But when we don't have any concept, when society itself is in question, when the magisterium's up for grabs, then it's basically who has the right to speak anywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
The idea of deplatforming becomes, well, everyone wants to deplatform somebody somewhere, right? Even in a liberal order, right? The outright Nazi and communist and free, we need to get rid of the entire liberal order. That is deplatformed from the mainstream and consigned to be discussed in a cordoned off area called a university, right? Where we have free reign of ideas. I mean, it's not legally enforced, but all magisteriums, all ordered hierarchies of human society have certain spaces where ideas are more or less accepted, and in some sense, that's a deplatforming.
Oh, I agree. I mean, like this is. I've been thinking about a lot about the sort of radicalization along lines of principle, and the question that liberals like, and when I say liberals, I do not mean the American version of liberals because they are progressives. What the sort of English use of the term of liberal means is freedom. The sort of traditional liberal type, and they've got to come to terms with the fact that their conception of free speech is an endorsement of Nazi academics.
Yes, well, but this is the thing. That's true. But the other thing that's true is that when the more pertinent in America, right, is that the liberalism and this focus on expression and sort of the English virtues, the Enlightenment concepts of liberty, this is not going to last a cultural space that's dominated by people who do not believe in liberal concepts of justice for more than a generation. Once that happens, once you get a new generation of people who don't believe in this, these liberal concepts are going to be out the door really quickly.
Yeah, but that applies to any movement.
I know, and this is the thing, though. I mean, so what I'm saying is that liberalism has to maintain its dominance in the public square.
Yes.
And we could call that deplatforming. We could say that we support a partial deplatforming of anti-liberal ideas in the public square, but that's what's necessary to maintain the magisterium of liberalism.
No, I don't think we can do that. That would be undermining the core principles of liberalism. I don't think you can ever argue for deplatforming from a liberal perspective, right? What you have to do is argue for out-competing them. I had something in my head then, but I just went.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's my fault. It's my brain, you know. Okay, so. Shit.
I think that.
Oh no! I've got it. Sorry, but let me. Right. Okay. So I've been thinking. I tell you what, I'm glad I spent some time reading Objectivism. I'm not an objectivist, but I can see the value in Objectivism. Right. I can't bring myself to say that selfishness is a virtue, but on the flip side, I like the way that they attack the ethics of altruism. That's a very powerful technique that could be used by conservatives and liberals alike against the alt-right and the progressives, because essentially it comes down to the question of who matters. And the progressives will tell you other people matter. Brown people, women, trans, dwarven, gender fluid, demiqueers, whatever. And the alt-right will tell you, the white master race, somehow including the Slavs and the Finns. But the liberals can use objectivism to say that I matter. I personally, in this conversation that I'm having, matter. Because every time an SJW is arguing for the ethic through the ethics of altruism for a group, I mean, like when Linda Sarsour stands up and goes, I'm arguing on behalf of Muslims. It's like, well, you are a Muslim, Linda. So let's cut right to the chase. You're arguing for yourself. I'm arguing for myself. And I think that's a way to stand morally against them.
Yeah, I suppose. I don't know if you're going to have a society where every person is in a conversation in order to be counted, in some sense. I mean,
no.
I'm not
suggesting that.
This infinitely permeated dialectic that I'm not so sure it really functionally exists.
No. Listen. What that does is it creates a moral impetus for universality. I
suppose. I think. I mean, this calls. No, wouldn't it just promote the idea that the people in the conversations were the ones who mattered.
Yeah, but there's no reason that they matter more than someone else, and the people who aren't there can't represent themselves. So you have to, and like, you can say, well, yeah, exactly, I matter, and if I wasn't in this conversation, in your mind, I wouldn't matter. So we need a philosophical system, an ethical system, an economic system, a social system that takes into account the people who aren't here. And you can't just say, well, the white people who aren't here can get fucked, because I'm a white person, I'm here right now, and I'm contesting this with you. What you're doing is immoral, and I can say it's immoral because I'm personally going to suffer from this, even if I wasn't here. So it demands an individualist form of worldview.
Yeah, I'm not so sure, though, this would maintain. I mean, I guess I've been highly skeptical about purely individualistic this purely individualistic Randian approach to sort of carry over intergenerational.
I'm not arguing for a Randian approach. This is I got into a big.
But no, I understand you're not arguing from a pure Randian approach, but the purely individualistic approach. So I would argue, that disintegration we talked about occurring intergenerationally, between where we didn't inculcate another generation, where we successively failed to inculcate generations with an understanding of what was required in terms of sacrifice to get the civilization they currently occupied. That is not the failure of that is due to this individualistic dialectic that you proposed for deciding who matters.
Go on, why's that?
And you know why?
Tell me.
Because there's a very important constituent that's not at the table when we're discussing about who matters. Previous generations who are dead.
Okay, that's interesting. I wasn't expecting you to say that.
I'm absolutely serious. Right?
Okay, yeah.
They sacrificed so that we're here, but they're nowhere present in the Randian dialectic of the conversation about who matters and who has the values going forward. And so unless their sacrifice is respected and communicated to the next generation is going to end up thinking that their inheritance and the traditions that have been bequeathed to them come out of the ether, that come out of pure privilege. This is not an original idea. My icon G.K. Chesterton said that tradition is the democracy of the dead. It's understanding that even though the dead or our previous grandparents and great-grandparents aren't here to actually lobby for their interests and communicate their perspective, what they sacrificed to bring us here, they still have a stake in what we do as a society. And I think our forgetting of that in large part is what created this collapse in the universities and in the educational system that we're seeing right now.
That's interesting. I'll have to mull that over, I think. I need to have some time to think about that and digest it. I don't know how I feel about it, because in fact I've recently been reading Thomas Paine, and his arguments against monarchy are very much hinging on the rejection of the sort of tyranny of past generations.
Absolutely right. Yes, thank you for bringing that up. Sorry,
that's okay. I'm glad I could help.
No, this is absolutely. I think we're hitting a really interesting conflict here. I don't know the right answer to this, right?
No, me either.
You're absolutely right that Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine and all of these Enlightenment thinkers really hated this concept that past generations could actually have some kind of imposition of their wills onto the current generation.
Well, they certainly did in their time.
Well, yeah, they did, right? But one of the fundamental reactionary principles from both Joseph de Maistre and Julius Evola and all of the Catholic thinkers in the 19th century that embodied this was that, no, indeed, the past generation does need to have some kind of say on what's right and what's wrong and how our society is governed, right? And this is a fundamental conflict between the two of them. I think that the Enlightenment thinkers had a lot to offer, but perhaps this needs to become more nuanced. I think there's something that we've sort of forgotten here, right? I think that the earlier concepts, the earlier wisdom of ancient Europe that Paine fought against, maybe he was too simplistic in dismissing it all.
I don't think he was dismissing it all. I think he was just explaining. I think really that he was just pointing out that technically they have no legitimacy. That's the problem is, like, they don't have the authority to dictate how I will live now.
Well, they certainly don't have, like, they can't actually, like, the dead can't rise and, like,
No, but what I mean is
fantasy setting and go, like, okay, you're
yeah,
gonna...
no, but what no, I don't mean literally, like, in the physical rising from the dead, obviously. What I mean is, there is no legitimacy for me if I was, say, the king, or no, say I'm not the king. For everyone to agree that I should be the king, and that there's no binding compact between me and future generations. That you could say for the generation that's alive, if every single person or the majority of people voted to make me the king, then fine. That's a binding compact between me and everyone else who voted for me, or however this comes into being. But people who aren't even alive don't get the choice. And going into the future, I've got no legitimate claim to their behaviour.
But do we not have a legitimate... I mean, we sacrifice for the future, right?
We do.
But we sacrifice for a particular future. We sacrifice for an understanding that our descendants are going to carry on something of ourselves into the future.
Yeah, but by this rationale, why aren't we still with an absolute monarchy? Or as a Catholic, are you in favour of that?
I'm actually... I'm actually... Sargon, I'm actually trying to take the middle path here.
Right, okay.
Right, I don't think that this is so much a answer that has a right or wrong answer. I think that this is a competing principle that needs to be covered.
I agree with you that tradition is important. I agree that these things should be respected. But I don't think that they should be a tool with which to bludgeon reformers, which they become.
There shouldn't be a tool to bludgeon reformers, but they need to be something that guides the people who want to reform society. I'm thinking of just like, just to bring a Christmassy example in, like just the Christmas Carol, right? Like Ebenezer Scrooge is someone who wants to reform the world and has something to do with the past. And, in order to sort of guide him morally, the past is brought back up, right? The people who are dead arise and tell him, right, what he owes the past and what he owes the future. And the two most pertinent sections of A Christmas Carol are his experience with a past that's eternally gone and dead people, and a future which he'll never see. So those are two things that are totally outside his limited lifespan. And I would argue that when it comes to morality generally, and you see this in Dante too, right? Our what we owe to the past and what we owe to a future we'll never see, that plays a really, really important role to what we have to do as individuals.
So I'm just mulling it over.
This conversation got really heavy really quickly.
Yeah, that's okay. That's why I invited you on, though. I know that you're capable of heavy conversation. I like that. I have to think about it because, I mean, there's one side. I agree that there is. We are stewards of what has been handed to us, and I think that we can agree, like most people, societally, we can agree that it was entirely to our benefit that our ancestors struggled to bequeath us the countries that we have. That's something I'm sure that literally everyone can agree on. It's to our benefit. Obviously, these things aren't perfect, and so they need to be improved, and that's our responsibility as the current generations. The people alive now, it's our responsibility to bequeath something as good, if not better, to our descendants. That's actually quite a good argument for not being a degenerate SJW and deconstructing everything. However, within this thesis is the antithesis that the thesis is not perfect. Our society, and from the I'm just going to use the SJW lens for a second, just because it's convenient.
Go for it. It's a useful lens to use every now and again.
It is. There are inherent oppressions within this hierarchy that, if you're an SJW, you find intolerable. And so you do what you can to demonstrate these oppressions, even if like, people listening to this probably won't find these legitimate oppressions, but like, the complete freedom of women to not have consequences, or the freedom of trans people to deconstruct gender for other people and things like this. They consider the lack of the ability to do this to be oppressions inherent in the societal order that we have been bequeathed. And so they're bad examples. I should have used slavery. I should have just used slavery.
Go for it. Use slavery.
Yeah, slavery, even though it's manifestly unjust, and even before the abolition of slavery, it was understood, I think, that it was unjust. It was just justified because, well, they're subhuman, it's God's order, whatever justification.
It was mostly practicality, I would assume. And then people tried to come up with other, extenuating circumstances that they could link to, abstract theories of racial superiority or religion or whatever.
Yeah. It doesn't matter. Whatever sort of rationalizations they had to perpetuate an injustice. And so I don't want to... We need to find a way of not simply condemning the past as being immoral, because if we do, we're going to become the complete SJW degenerates, and we'll end up losing everything that we have. But on the other side, there are things that, sometimes there are things that do need to be changed, and we can't allow traditionalism and this sense of proprietorship over society and our history to inhibit our ability to fix problems that we now have effectively morally solved. Because, one of the things that drives me crazy about the SJWs is their moral condemnation of history. And I'm just like, look, you're basically saying that the Romans were bad at warfare because they didn't have guns. When you do, moral innovation is a technology that has evolved and become great throughout history. We've been... Yeah,
if Aristotle was so smart, why didn't he have an iPhone? Right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, you have to understand, he was just, a man of his time. Everyone's a man of their time. And it's very difficult to innovate, even if afterwards the innovation seems obvious. It's like, well, that was easy to invent. Well, why didn't you invent it then? Because it's actually not easy to invent something new. And morality is the same. Morality has changed and improved and regressed over time.
Well, but here's the thing. Even when we say morality improves or regresses, I think what you're asking for is an objective standard of justice, because even in order to say that morality improved or regressed, we have to have a standard by which it improved or regressed.
Well, yeah, the comparison is the status prior.
Well, but that's the comparison, but the comparison has to be relative to a standard, right?
Well, no. Can we not use the current standard as the standard?
I guess functionally that's what we do, right? But in order for it to be not incoherent, we have to say that there is some objective intergenerational concept of justice.
I don't agree.
I don't know how because otherwise every single change would be a good change by its own standard.
No, I don't agree. The purpose of morality is presumably to alleviate human suffering.
That's one of them, right? If you go to, this is sort of the way we viewed it in the early 20th century. But if you actually analyze human morality, and I don't want to do this here, but we could play sort of thought experiments back and forth, Sargon, and I could get you to say certain things are immoral that don't directly relate to human suffering in the strong sense. It looks as though if you look at Jonathan Haidt, which I haven't read,
he's on my list as well. He's on my list.
Definitely read, what is it, The Righteous Mind?
Yeah, I've had it recommended many times.
It definitely deserves to be on your list. And I know we both have reading lists stacked up to the ceiling.
Yeah, it's awful.
But we can understand that human beings have moral instincts that go beyond just that. Usually it has something to do with freedom, an understanding of there are certain things like freedom, care, harm, and then a variety of other moral standards that really pertain to what a human being should be, right? Like clean, has some kind of sense of propriety, other things like that too. So it looks like the moral instinct in humans is much more complicated than just aversion of harm.
The thing is, isn't all of this designed to prevent the aversion of harm, though? You know, I mean, why be clean? What difference does it make if you're clean? Well, it means you won't get disease.
Well, I mean, not necessarily. I mean, I know you probably know there are certain thought experiments you could do that would sort of, you could take deplorable actions like bestiality, clean them up, and assure you that they don't cause any harms to anyone, and people still say they're wrong, and I still believe that they're wrong, right? And
I think though that comes from a genuine belief. I mean, like, for example, is it morally wrong for someone to create a perfect mechanical copy of an animal and have sex with that?
Yeah, I would. I mean, well, me personally, I probably would say it was wrong, but like,
yeah, I mean, yeah, I'd say it's degenerate too. But like, is it like morally wrong? Because like, I mean, the reason we don't like bestiality is because I mean, you can't be sure that the animal's consenting, obviously, and the various diseases, and there are loads of like things, but like in abstract, if you put it in, if you're creating something that isn't an animal but is a representation of an animal, and so that none of these things can happen, I mean, it's gross, but is it genuinely immoral, or is it just that we're conditioned to know that that's going to lead to bad consequences, even though the robot obviously couldn't lead to any bad consequences?
Even the consequences, you'd say, like, well, the harm. This is the other thing too, right?
Yeah.
Even if we go to the other end and say like it's all just harm and an appeal to the consequence of harm, we still have to ask, like, well, what is harm, and what is this thing called the human that we're trying to prevent the harm of, right? Is it just the avoidance of pain recepting activations and the production of endorphins, or is it some kind of advanced concept of thriving? And once it's an advanced concept of thriving that you're trying to avoid the harm of,
I like where you're going with this.
Then all of a sudden you remanufacture the same moral instincts that we tried to get away from, like the concept of the Aristotelian good life. And now you're back with Aristotle, even after 2,000 years of human development, which I don't think it's a secret. I think that we never really get away from great thinkers like Aristotle.
Honestly, I would rather go back to Aristotle than indulge in Plato like we continue to do.
I think they're both part of this balanced breakfast of.
I don't know. I'm really getting tired of the kind of Platonic societal planners. I mean, maybe it's the liberal in me talking, but these people are cancer. Anyone is like, what we should do with society? It's like, yeah, you can shut up. How about you think of what you can do individually yourself? Be the change you want to see. That's my opinion.
Some part of me highly suspects that the societal dissolution. I don't think we all agree that we are going to have a societal collapse. But I think that even you, in your conversation with Millennial Woes, you understand that we're kind of looking over the precipice of one, right?
I wouldn't necessarily say collapse. I think that's probably worth defining.
Okay, well, I mean, you said something similar in your conversation with Millennial Woes about the coming kind of falling apart or something like that.
There's definitely going to be a reshaping of the order.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, when we say collapse, I think it easily puts into people's minds the idea that apocalypse or something, and that's not what I mean. Like, ideological and moral collapse doesn't necessarily mean a collapse in the physical or industrial capacity of the world or anything like that.
Well, okay, sure, but part of me suspects that
I'm not ruling out
this maybe not physical collapse, but the spiritual or societal collapse is sort of manufactured by people who would like to redesign society anyway, right?
What are they? Who's the they in this?
Well, they would be people who are either progressive or technocratic in their perspective and see the reigning liberal or, in some sense, traditionalist order as being obstacles of putting together their Platonic utopia.
I think there are definitely professors like that. I think the average social justice activist is... I mean, that requires some long-term planning and conceptualization. I think the average social justice activist can't see any further than the end of their nose, which is where their feelings end. I don't think the average activist or progressive is... I don't think they're that well that woke. to be honest.
Mhm. Well, no, I'd say I notice it myself. I mean, as somebody who, at a philosophical level, is deeply at war with a lot of the philosophies that are popular in the West today.
Mm.
I on a personal level, I just want to live my life in isolation of a lot of the social forces that I oppose. But there's sort of a sick Schadenfreude appreciation of the thought that the whole edifice is just going to go crumbling off into the
Oh
ocean.
yeah, oh yeah.
I'm sure everyone feels this at a certain degree, but
Yeah.
especially in our present environment, where so many people really, I think, feel separated from the reigning political order or the reigning cultural order
Oh,
on both the left
absolutely.
and the right.
Absolutely. I mean that's why Trump and Brexit happened.
Hmm.
It's and they still don't understand. I mean, they'll still, like with Brexit, they'll sit there and go, yeah, but the NHS isn't getting 350 million a week, is it? It's like, bitch, no one cares. No one cares. They cared that you were just awful to them. That's what they care about. They cared about giving you a black eye.
Yeah, I mean, they cared about smashing the system, and
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, I mean, the alt right it's going to be sort of the anarchist punkified version of a conservative movement in a lot of
Mm.
ways. I think it's unavoidable. And I think that it's unavoidable that the left is going to, in part, move in this direction. I think the left is much closer to the edifice of power, so there's less motivation for it to do that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, there's a lot of dissatisfied people on the left.
Yeah, there are. You've got to love the hypocrisy of the progressives as well. Ultimately, their philosophy is to get rid of all structures of power. So they've co-opted all of the structures of power, and once you're operating them, there's no way you're just going to give them up.
Yeah, you're not going to give them up, and this kind of creates this, this. I think the technocrats kind of see it as a good sort of bulldozer. They see the technocrats see this as a good kind of bulldozer mechanism to get rid of the elements of society they see in the way
Mm.
of their projects, right? So, okay, these European governments are in the way of the EU. Progressivism can be used to sort of bulldoze them out of the way, right?
Hmm.
Oh, wow, gender roles are cutting down our workforce participation. We need more people working 80-hour weeks to, in a job they hate to make sure that, Facebook turns a profit this quarter.
Hmm.
Well, we got to bulldoze out of the way gender norms, right?
Yeah.
Who cares if they make people happy, right? And so there's been sort of this alliance between a lot of the corporate interests, which see traditionalism as being an obstacle to their profitability, and people who just want to deconstruct everything.
Which is incredibly ironic, given how progressivism is the obstacle that's in the way of their profitability.
You think so?
Oh,
Well, I mean,
absolutely.
certainly to a certain extent.
Absolutely. Like okay, name an industry. Name an industry, like the comic book industry, the Magic the Gathering industry. Like anywhere that progressivism has taken over, it starts ruining because it gets
Oh, yeah.
preachy and no one wants it to be preachy.
Well, I don't know, man. When I see these industries, right? Um, I just think that the comics and games and Magic the Gathering industries, the progressive lion was growling, and they just grabbed somebody and threw him under the bus,
Oh yeah,
right, to be devoured, right?
absolutely.
Like, and they just cared the least about games and comics, right? They were doing that so they didn't have to throw somebody else that they needed more off the bus.
Sure, but the thing is, like, the corporates don't seem to understand that, like, they still haven't twigged that progressive outrage on social media is not public opinion. That's what they haven't figured out yet.
It's not public opinion, but it's a certain kind of opinion that they have to respect. Otherwise, they are in serious danger.
Otherwise, they get propagandized out of existence, yeah.
Actually, this is fascinating because I think we're coming up a little bit on time, but there's one last thing I wanted to talk to you about.
Yeah.
Has nothing to do with the alt-right, but has everything to do with this.
Go ahead.
Right? And that is how this apparatus works and how it works in the wake of all these sexual harassment scandals you've been seeing. Right?
That's a good
Because
subject.
I think the reason why they pay attention to progressive opinion is because the progressives seem to be giving them blind eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And they need blind eyes. That's why a progressive tweet is worth 1,000 angry conservative rednecks in the Midlands. That's why a progressive tweet is worth 1 million angry gamers who don't have any voice inside the institutions that could judge them.
Mm-hmm.
They have essentially the people who judge them morally and in their own internal magisterium are the progressives.
Yes.
And they know that they're doing things that violate the progressive standard because, well, frankly, everybody does, right? I don't even think the progressive standard is coherent, right? I don't think that anyone could obey all of the barriers that, these
Absolutely.
progressives have put around sexuality.
Absolutely.
And so what they do is, the progressives, they may not have an achievable morality, but they are selling indulgences by the bundle. And Hollywood and all of these industries would rather have an impossible to achieve morality plus an indulgence system rather than a coherent morality that they actually might be expected to live up to.
They have their indulgence system.
Well, they might be losing it right now, which is the really critical thing.
Well, what do you mean?
I don't know what's going to happen.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding. Can you clarify what you mean?
So I think, so they had their indulgence system previous to just this last few months, right? Like Harvey Weinstein was the ultimate example of this. That's why all these people are like, when they get caught, they're mouthing progressive pieties. Like Harvey Weinstein's like, oh, I abuse women, but I'm going to make an anti-gun control movie.
Yeah.
Sell me my indulgences, please.
Well,
Kevin Spacey is like, I had sex with little boys, but I'm a gay man. Sell me my indulgences, right?
Wasn't that great?
And I guess
that great?
Ben Affleck actually was sold an indulgence because his confession was particularly,
Did you see him on? What was it? It wasn't Colbert, was it? It was Jimmy Fallon or something like that.
It never has there been a more convincing mea culpa since Henry II got gone to Canterbury to be whipped by the priest.
Jesus, for killing his expression and his body language and everything, the tone of his voice. He was so fucking sorry.
It was medieval, wasn't it?
Yes. Oh, thank God. I haven't spoken to anyone else who's seen this.
Henry II with Thomas Becket, right?
Dude,
the king is getting whipped by the priest.
Yes, it was literally like. And then he was like, "Oh, I'm giving away all this money to women's charities and stuff like this." And
just as happened, right? The church gets its tithe from the indulgence, right?
He gets to buy his indulgence with real money.
Yeah, exactly. In some sense, I don't know. I'm certainly not part of the skeptic movement, but in some sense, some of the Gamergate was a little bit like a Martin Luther with the anti-indulgence things. But at any rate, what's going on now, right, is this indulgence system is really going to be called into question. Either it's going to ramp up with explicit calls for indulgences and confessions, or it's just going to be like, we're not going to issue any excuses for this, right? And white men are no longer going to have an out if they voice progressive pieties and toe the line. I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that I'm certainly looking forward to that video you keep on promising us, Sargon. Yeah. The one about male feminists. Right?
It's going to be a Christmas present, I promise.
Oh, but I think we all know in that video we all know what the reason why we're anticipating is we all know what we're going to see, right?
Oh yeah.
A lot of men who are totally mouthy and sexually effectively buying off their own misbehavior through piety, mea culpas, and maybe actually cash indulgences. To a certain extent.
Ben Affleck is going to be the poster boy of that.
So here you see there is this system in place. Now the question is, what's going to happen, right? What are the feminists going to do? That they have had an enormous victory. This victory could erase all of the problems that they've had over the past 3 years. But I don't know what they're going to do. They're going to try to cash it now, right? Or they're going to try to build their power structure on these institutions that much stronger. And I don't know. I if they were smart, they'd be building their power structure stronger. But I think they might just take the cash.
Okay, so I think the audience cheered for Affleck, so I think that's probably going to be something of a barometer of progressive opinion. I think that this kind of this is the thing that they need to understand, that people apologizing, right? You will have no dignity left at the end. Like it's over. Your personal dignity over. You will be groveling, salam, kiss the feet of whoever is accusing you. You are as a moral sovereign, you're over. You will never.
Well, they don't see that what the people clapping don't see is that the standard that Ben Affleck is being whipped for is not coherent.
No.
This is one big difference, and maybe we disagree with this, but at least the Christian standard for which the church stole indulgences, at least it was coherent. But there's absolutely no coherence. There's no way to win feminist sexual morality, right? No. And when you get drawn up on that chopping block, you're not going to have a big hunk of cash that you can hurl at them to get you to absolve your sins. And you're not going to have anything they want in terms of a confession.
This
and if
is
you're
why
in their way, they're going to push that button and get you. They're gonna take everything away. They're gonna take your dignity, like you said, right?
This is why it was so important when I was talking to Thomas Smith that I just didn't care about his standards on the issue. So he was effectively saying this tweet is a sin, and I was just saying I don't care, and that he loses all of his power over me. He's got no way of actually compelling me to feel any way and do anything. And he literally asked for an apology that it wasn't even a tweet aimed at him.
But if Thomas Smith was your HR director,
absolutely, it would have been completely different.
Income from an independent source, that dynamic might have been much more.
It was only because I had the luxury of being able to just flounce his moral standards that I was able to do that. I mean, if for any other person, you're going to get fired.
Yeah. And this is the difficulty. In some ways, people on YouTube, you're sort of thumbing your nose at the authority that a lot of people don't have the liberty to thumb their nose at. And this is sort of the question is, I honestly wonder what is going to happen post these sexual harassment crises, because the feminists at this point, they can make a big move right now, and we have no idea what it's, or the progressive generally, they can make a big move and we have no idea what it's going to be.
Oh, I've got every idea what it's going to be.
You think they're going to what?
Excuse me, I've had this cough, it's really annoying me.
I'm sorry.
It's the consolidation of feminist power over Hollywood. I mean, don't get me wrong, Hollywood's always been very progressive, very enlightened, but now it's going to become tyrannical. Before it was just, oh yeah, that's definitely good. They were obsequious to it, but now it's going to be them calling the shots. Just watch.
But this is going to create a problem for them. This is going to create Hollywood Gate in the same way that Gamergate happened, right? Because the feminist power in Hollywood revolved around them not actually devouring Hollywood and actually buying them off. And in many ways, Anita Sarkeesian was the olive branch that Hollywood handed to the feminist movement in order to keep them from actually devouring industries that they needed to go on.
Yep. They don't understand that they've stopped the growth of the thing when they take control of it. And so from that point onwards, it's a steady decline.
Well, they could continue the growth if they just took their indulgences, but
No. That's redistribution. They're not growing the industry that they've taken over. Now they're redistributing the wealth of the industry as a
You misunderstand. But if, for instance, the apparatus could sit above, like it did with Hollywood, right, in Magic the Gathering, right? If all of these people wanted were some cash, the comics industry would just give it to them, right? Essentially, that's what it does when it just creates these comics that nobody reads that are just okay, here's your thing, we're going to lose money on it, take it, right? But it only really starts becoming a problem when they interfere with the operation of the industry itself.
Yeah, exactly. Now they are going to take control of things, and they are going to reform them in the perfect feminist image, and people are not going to like it. And so it'll end up, effectively, I think it'll eventually end up just opening up the market. Which is actually good for everyone else when you think about it. Like, Patreon is a great example. I emailed, I started an account on Maker Support, and I'd never heard of it before, but they were billing themselves as a free speech Patreon alternative, and they weren't called Hatreon. So I was like, okay, good. I know, right?
Branding, come on.
I know. It's like, I was like, oh, good, a Patreon alternative. Okay, I'm never going to sign up to a site called Hatreon, because as soon as I do, I'm admitting to the SJWs that what I'm doing is hateful.
Not only that, but is a husband going to bring the credit card bill home to his wife, and he's like, "Honey, what's this $20 post to Patreon for?"
Yeah. Well, it's so I can support someone who's openly admitting he's hateful towards black people.
Yeah,
It's like, no, I'm not admitting that. I refuse to consent to your premise, SJW. And
I mean, of all places to countersignal, the funding site, funding site of all places.
Yeah.
I mean, countersignaling has its place.
Absolutely.
Don't get me wrong. I mean, I think that's mostly what the alt-right is anyway. But the funding site.
I know, right? It's like, I'm not signing up to that. I'm sorry, because I'm not admitting to them and to the world that I get my money because I'm hateful. Because that's effectively what Patreon is. And they literally say hate speech is free speech. Okay, but I don't agree what I'm doing is hate speech. I don't agree with the concept of fucking hate speech. I'm not buying into that. I'm sorry. So yeah, anyway, I was speaking to Maker Support, and the guy, it's a small team, and the chap who emailed me, I was having trouble getting my address in. He's like, oh, okay, I've just changed the code, so like it does. He's using a third party program called Stripe that verifies addresses or something, and apparently they actually didn't need postcodes, and there's a problem internationally with postcodes or something, and so he changed the system, just on the fly, in fact, to not require the postcode because it wasn't necessary. And
Nice.
he was saying how they've just blown up all of a sudden. And it's like, yeah, because there is a huge market need for a non-progressive alternative to Patreon. People want to be able to give content creators money, and that's great because, I mean, I love the way the new internet economy is working. I absolutely love it. It's, if you work hard, people will volunteer. That's amazing. I love that. It's totally voluntary. But yeah, they're really exploding because they've got a new market niche, and they're just called Maker Support. Totally neutral, but they're not a platform that's going to be bullied by SJWs. Fabulous. That's all it is. It's just having the moral fortitude to say no to them as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I hate to say this is. Have you ever heard of Conquest's laws?
Conquest laws? No.
Conquest laws of politics?
No, I haven't actually.
So it's by this. It's this. I forget the guy's called. Was he Robert Conquest? And he's had 3 laws of politics. The first law is that everyone is conservative about what he knows best, which I say everyone's conservative about the thing he loves, which I think is true. Well, that probably because I'm a conservative to a certain degree. But the second one is that every organization, not explicitly or constitutionally right-wing, will sooner or later become left-wing over time. I think over very much the same intergenerational process we discussed when we discussed civilizational decline. And these two laws have really served me as a good standard for understanding the progress of things. You always have to be careful because things will eventually they'll drift towards the left. And so, with things like, was it the support site you were mentioning, I think that certain guarantees need to be put into writing if you do not want a repeat to happen.
I do agree with a written constitution of some form. I don't know. I'd have to look into it. I'm not familiar.
Yeah,
with
I share your optimism, though. I think that
I think we can do
if
things.
people can avoid the pushback right now, I think that there is a lot of opportunity for online creators getting opinions out there that are broadly against mainstream sensibilities.
Yeah, and there's a big thirst for non-approved opinions, and I honestly, eventually, I mean, like if things keep going the way they're going, and I've got absolutely no reason to think that they won't, eventually, the mainstream media will effectively just become the progressive bubble. And then you'll have the libertarian bubble, the conservative bubble, the alt-right bubble, the liberal bubble. You'll have all of these separate ghettos, effectively, online. And in many ways, never the twain shall meet. And in a lot of ways, they won't even be aware of each other's existence. That's, I think, what's going to happen going into the future.
Well, that kind of, that will be interesting, right? Will
Yeah,
we just become sort of separate tribes, like
basically. Yeah.
in William Gibson's Neuromancer, where these large corporations are kind of ruling over all of these incredibly disaggregated human cultural groups that are,
Yeah.
sort of eternally angry at them?
Yeah, that's. I think I haven't actually read Neuromancer, but I've heard of it. But yeah, I think
Oh well,
in the
yeah, it's
short
a
term,
good.
that's probably what's going to happen in the next like 30 years when kids have grown up with nothing but the internet. Like I think that's yeah, I think that's the way forward. I think that's what's going to happen.
Huh. Maybe we should. I have to get going. Maybe we should end it here. That seems like a good stopping point.
That does, but we'll definitely do another one of these if you want to.
Absolutely, I would love to, Sargon. That would be awesome.
Awesome.
Maybe we can talk about, well, the other developments in the world other than the alt-right and the progressives.
Yeah, yeah, but the thing is, like, I hate when people say that these aren't real problems. It's like, no, they are the only problems we really should be focusing on. These.
Actually, to tell you the truth, to bring it all back, that actually was the one thing. Well, not the one thing, but when you could tell that you meant business with Bosnick when he did oh, this isn't a real problem. I care about real problems, Sargon, not these social justice problems. Everybody listening to this, if you ever go against a progressive, that's like the first question you need to be prepared to constantly answer is to justify why you care about a certain issue, because the favorite tactic is to make it sound like whatever you're complaining about it's a side issue. No one cares about it. These things are just no one really cares. I care about the real issues like Black Lives Matter,
Yeah.
right? So that's something
What was
that's
my
really
answer to that?
irritating.
What did I say to him?
Oh, you had to. This is also thing. You brought up Goodfellow and Count Dankula.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm glad I did. That's a good
as
answer.
essentially suffering jail time under these
Yeah.
under so that's another thing too. The more specific you make your objection, the less the progressive can actually answer it, because
Yeah.
their contention is that conservative contentions are all manufactured and artificial. And when you can say, "Oh no, my friend spent a night in jail,"
Because he.
and his kids didn't know where he was because he made a meme that the left didn't like. Well, there goes that entire objection. You didn't learn that from Fox News,
Yeah.
You didn't develop this objection because Bill O'Reilly told you it was wrong.
No, no. I'm glad I had a good, solid response to him there, because I remember him saying that, but I can't remember what I'd said. But yeah, anyway, we will definitely do another one of these. This has been a real pleasure, and
Oh yeah, definitely.
I'll leave a link to Distributist channel in the description. He's well worth watching, guys. If you want, like, basically, I consider these to be quite high level conversations. I don't think most people could hold them, and if you want more like this, go to his channel. Definitely.
Okay. All right. Thanks, man.
Take care, man. Bye.